Hi everyone, welcome to Smart City Institute Japan's webinar series called Global Perspectives on Smart Cities. I'm Nagumo, Executive Managing Director of Smart City Institute Japan, your host of this session. And today is day 3, the last day of so-called Estonia week. We have been working on the Smart Cities webinar, focusing on the various aspects of Estonia, starting from cybersecurity, and then yesterday, the digital ID and X-Road, and today is the last day. And today's focus is the internet voting in Estonia, experiences from 12 elections. Now, let me invite two distinct speakers for today. First, Dr. Priit Vinkel, a senior expert eGA. So, Dr. Vinkel, please come in.
Yes, hello.
Thank you for joining us. All right. Second person, Mr. Kudo from Mitsubishi UFJ Research and Consulting. Hi, Kudo-san.
Hello, Tak.
All right. So as always, we have a game plan. And first, we'll have a presentation by Kudo-san, followed by presentation by Dr. Vinkel. And after that, we have an open discussion. And for viewers, I would encourage all of you to write comments or questions in the chat box, which I'll pick up later at the open discussion time. All right, without further ado, let's move on to the presentation by Kudo-san.
Hello, everyone. This is Kudo from Mitsubishi UFJ Research and Consulting. And I am very happy to make a presentation today on internet voting with my friend, Dr. Priit Vinkel. So let me put my screen. I hope you can see it. So today, my agenda is what can Japan learn from Estonia's experience? And after my presentation, Priit will speak about more on the Estonia's experience as he is an expert on this area. Let me start with this picture. You can see that the two gentlemen are holding a ballot box with a paper, voting tickets. And this is the one scene from the Liberal Democratic Party's presidential election back in September. As you may recall, that we had a change in the, the prime minister later on. So this scenery that you see it now may end if Japan introduces iVoting. This is a slide that shows you the current situation of the internet voting, iVoting in Japan. And there is a plan to conduct the test with the aim of introducing the House of Councillors or Sangiin election in 2022 from overseas voting. So those people who are Japanese people living in abroad can vote for the House of Councillors election. And also, I put here the Yahoo Japan's internet survey. This was done back in August to September, and the survey responded was 25,000 votes or people. And they say that the 70% people said agree with internet voting, and the disagree of 26% and don't know other is 3.5%. So you can say that there's a tendency that people would like to introduce iVoting in Japan in general. This is the iVoting in Japan and some kind of effect that we can see. And one is the increase in younger voters. This is just an expectation, but those younger voters who are familiar with internet may be able to make voting through internet. So that could trigger to increase the younger votes. And also, in general, the voting could support elderly and persons with disabilities in Japan's super aging society. So those people may not need to go to the polling station to make a vote. And one thing that is important is in Japan, failure is not allowed. So the trust of elections is important. And if failure occurs, then it will damage the election. And if the that could eventually lead to the election invalid and re-election is needed. So this is a kind of a risk that we have. I go to the benefit of voting and divided into three categories: from the voter point of view, from the election administrator point of view, and the candidate's point of view. And for the voter, we are the voter, I am the voter, and I don't need to go to the polling station. So that is quite good, I think. And this could again major support for the elderly and persons with disabilities. And for the election administrator who organizes this election, so we have many polling stations, as you can recall, back in the last election in October. But this I-voting could reduce the polling station. And also at the polling station, you will see that many people are there. But you could simplify the operations at the polling station, including the witness, the tachiainin, and also the checking of the voting tickets as well. So those could be simplified. And eventually that will trigger to reduce the human cost. And also the candidates. Yes, I think, the Priit will touch upon this later on based on the Estonia's experience, but I put it here neutral. But in Japan, non-partisans or mutoha hold the key to the directions of voting sometimes. So this weather factor, weather is fine, then I go to the polling station. If it's a rainy day or stormy days, I do not go to the polling station. This may have an impact to the result as well. Here, I go with the history of electronic voting and I-voting. This is an important notion that I need to distinguish here between electronic voting and I-voting. In Japan, we have done electronic voting, e-voting. And this is a vote by pressing the touch panel or push button of an electronic device at the polling station. So we are using a device and we touch the panel, and that's the thing that I call it electronic voting here. And back in 2002, the act was enforced so that the local government elections can use this electronic device in the election. And you see that here, 2002, Okayama Prefecture, Niimi City, has done the first electronic voting, and it was conducted. This was a mayoral election as well as the city council election. So this was the first case about 20 years ago. And then the following year, 2003, another, the local government, Kani City in Gifu Prefecture, they did the council election, but the failure of an electronic device occurred, unfortunately. And then 2005, the city council election in Kani City was declared invalid by the court. So this was the big incident because the election was declared invalid. And between 2002 to 2016 here, 25 electronic voting was conducted by 10 local governments in Japan. So you can see that compared with the number of local governments in Japan, very limited cases occurred. And here I put it in bold, but 2019 after Tsukuba city of Ibaraki Prefecture, they conducted the I-voting POC, proof of concept, using the MyCard and blockchain. Here, let me touch upon a little bit about the global trends of I-voting. And in sum, the national election was done in Estonia only in the world. Other countries are basically at the local government level. So Estonia side, I will leave it to Priit to discuss more. But so far, 12 elections by I-voting were done. And the last one was done in October, so last month. in USA, United States of America, election of the local officials in King County in Washington state was held in 2020. And also, so they have a number of cases done in local government field. And also, you recorded back in 2020 US presidential election, when Mr. Trump was also running, he criticized that e-voting system, I have to mention here, not i-voting system, for removing his 2.7 million votes. He thought he gained this, but this was a claim that he made. In Canada, Canada is also known as a front runner for the i-voting, and they have started this i-voting back in 2002 and earlier than Estonia case. And this Canadian government announced that it was premature to introduce i-voting, stating that the careful testing was necessary to verify its confidentiality, reliability, and consistency. Switzerland stopped i-voting in 2019, but they started testing again back in this year as well. The overseas security researchers pointed out that theoretically, it is possible to rewrite the voting results. So that's why they stopped and they started testing again this year. Australia, the New South Wales, they have done the i-voting, both in the Legislative Council, which is equivalent to Senate, and the Legislative Assembly, which is equivalent to House. And I just put some examples for the Asia, and in China and Taiwan, not implemented, as far as we know. The risks, yes, we have risks. The interruption of suspension of voting by the cybersecurity attack, and also voting by threats. So free will to vote is restrained. You know that when we do the i-voting at home or somewhere remotely, if you are under threat by someone, so you are forced to vote against your will. So that is the thing. This is the risk, voting by threat. And also information leakage. So the safety of voting is quite important. So information leakage must be protected not to happen. Here, this is my last slide before I turn over to Priit. And this is a kind of a message from Audrey Tan, the leader of Taiwan. She is the Minister of Digitalization. And, Taiwan is a kind of a world leader in digital participative democracy. And she thinks that we should no longer talk about e-democracy, but about the collaborative government. Co-gov is the idea of gathering together as a public service of collaboration. Everyone from the minister to a teenager who does not have the right to vote is equal, and everyone has the right to say. Maybe I'm jumping too much, but this i-vote, introduction of the i-voting may lead to another new world, that a kind of a digital participative democracy. Thank you very much for listening, and I will turn to Priit for the further presentation.
All right, Priit, it's your turn now.
Great, thank you, and good morning from my side. Good afternoon for you in Japan, and really warm greetings from Tallinn, Estonia, here in northern Europe. I will also try to share my screen. I hope you can see it, and then we can go on. So first of all, thank you for having me. My name is Priit Vinkel, and I'm senior expert in the field of smart governance in the e-governance academy here in Estonia. Some words also on my background. I'm a political scientist, actually, by trade, but worked for more than 15 years in elections before joining the eGA this year. And I was for 7 years head of the Estonian State Electoral Office, responsible for actually all the election organization. Estonia is a unitary country, so we have all election organization joined together on the governmental level and then organized together with the help of the local governments, of course, but still organized from top down in that matter. So before we go to the topic of internet voting in Estonia, just let me briefly introduce also the e-governance academy to you. We have been active since 2002, so already almost 20 years, and we are independent mission-based organization here mainly here in Estonia, but also branches in Ukraine, Serbia, and the Caribbean, for example, and we are non-profit, non-governmental, and non-academic organization, mainly let's say conveying best practice and a lot of this practical knowledge that we as experts and also Estonia and other countries are there to offer. And the different topics are actually covered by the eGA all over the world, starting from smart governance and change management in the digitalization and transformation field, also technology and open data, which also Estonia has quite a lot of experience already over the years. Of course, e-democracy and e-participation that also Kudo talked about on the last slide. Also really important topics here in Estonia, not only voting, but also e-participatory, the different topics also, participatory budgeting, for example, on the local level, and different other interesting topics there. And of course, really hot topic nowadays, it's cybersecurity, especially on the national level and international cooperation on cybersecurity. So these really important matters are where eGA is actually working on and also taking part and organizing also as an let's say organization different let's say projects and takes part in also in larger projects all over the world. Also together really working really heavily on the Japanese topics and different topics that are really close to heart also for you in that matter. So first of all, when we talk about internet voting, it's really important, as Kudo already mentioned, to make the difference between internet voting and electronic voting. Electronic voting here on the right is really something that has been around for let's say roughly more than already 30 years, even before, because technology in elections is actually something that goes back even 100 years with these analog machines and pin machines and all the different technological help that the election organizer has taken from different fields before. But yeah, electronic voting traditionally goes to the machine side of voting, which is especially important in places where there are more than one election at the time, for example, that there's different choices to be made by the voter and where the ballots are maybe a bit longer. There's a lot of, let's say, you have more than one choice to make. In Estonia, we usually have just one election and one choice to make on the ballot. So that's why we in Estonia skipped, let's say, the electronic voting part where machines are used in polling station mainly, and went in the beginning of the 2000s straight to internet voting, where it is possible to vote over the internet over, unfortunately, an uncontrolled environment. But we'll come to that in a bit, or what could already also inclined about the the question of coercion, the question of is it possible to vote from such a environment where the government, the election organizer, it has full control over the setting where the election is organized, and really important, what instant voting, especially in Estonia, has their roots in, it's the identity management, that there is a possibility to have a verifiable and trustworthy remote identity in the internet or behind the computer. This is something really important, where this all grew out of, let's say. So maybe for some of you, it's even good to understand where we are. Here in Estonia. We are in the northern parts of Europe, just below Finland, and we are together with our really close corporate and neighbors, Latvia and Lithuania. We form the Baltic countries. You have most likely heard about that, and as you can see also on the map, we have a large neighbor. We have a large neighbor called Russia in that matter. But we are a parliamentary republic, member of the European Union and NATO, and lots of different other international organizations, but we are a small country with only approximately 1 million votes. It depends on the elections. In parliamentary elections, we have about 900,000 voters, and in local elections more than 1 million, because also local residents who are not Estonian citizens can take part in local elections. And in all of those settings, Estonia has had internet voting since 2005. And in between 2005 and today, there have been 12 elections, 12 possibilities for the voters to actually, in parallel to paper voting. We have not replaced paper voting with internet voting, but in parallel to paper voting, the possibility to also give a vote then over the internet. It's really important to emphasize here that internet voting is a choice. It is not compulsory to use this way of voting. All the different voting methods that we have are available for the voter, because since the re-independence, since 1991, as we regained our independence after an occupation by the Soviet Union, we have had a lot of variety of voting methods in our elections. There has been a longer period of voting. We'll come to that in a bit, but there has been a possibility for the voter to really choose what kind of voting method to then utilize. And in those, let's say, last 3 elections that we have had, more than 45% of voters have now voted online, a bit more than half of the votes coming on paper. So it's half and half, more or less, where we have ended up, but we started really low. We come to that also in a bit. And also really important to understand for you that voting is not only a one-day arrangement, but lasts for a full week. And this is the voting calendar for the local elections we just had last month. On the 17th of October was the election day, but this is only the election day, let's say, where it is possible to vote in polling station on paper by using paper ballots, but online voting, internet voting is possible for 6 days before that. So that voting week is full of different voting opportunities, both in the polling stations and also in the online situation, plus of course all kinds of locations where the voter can call the ballot box, or even special home voting that was possible for 3 days, and was really used heavily because of the COVID threats that we also had here during the election. But to skip ahead, that really home voting was actually also impacted by the steep rise of online voting, that a lot of those old people who actually called the ballot box at home previously now are more and more taking part in online voting, because it's much more convenient for those people actually take part. So the old people are really actively voting in Estonia online, because they also are performing all the other different duties and services, getting their services from the government online, and also signing documents, using their banks online, and so on. So that's really important to understand here, that it is something that with the internet voting is used by all the different age groups. We'll look at that also in a bit. So first, the initial goal in 2002, and I have to say here that the beginnings of the 2000s were an El Dorado of all kinds of e-service developments, that lots of countries actually tried out also internet voting, piloted, had a lot of thoughts, but it stuck in Estonia, mainly because of the ecosystem that that started already in 1999, when we had a compulsory ID document issued, and the internet voting was not the first, let's say, e-service, but it was one of the later years e-service, where already quite a lot of the electorate, the voters, the citizens had a good understanding of the e-ID, had a good understanding of the e-society, had an understanding how to actually use this, and this growth of understanding, this growth of the ecosystem has gone on over the years, and we are in a position where really a lot of services are being offered electronically instead of on paper or in different offices. So as already said also before about the main idea also in Japan, maybe why to have internet voting to engage young voters. We have a look at this also later, but unfortunately young voters maybe benefiting not so much from internet voting, because they need to be lured to elections, or they need to be catered to the needs of any election a bit differently maybe than in internet voting. So it's unfortunately not the first solution here to actually engage those younger voters here, but it really the idea of catering to the mobile lifestyle of the voter, this has really worked well. So that all of those people really are actually traveling abroad, not living where they actually are on the books, let's say, and this freedom that the current societal situation has brought. Well, let's disregard the pandemic for a second, but still there's a lot more liberty, much more freedom to actually move around in the world. So in this mobile lifestyle, really it has helped a lot. And also as an additional eID service, it really started like that, and has really strong foundations also as a staple solution that the government actually has to offers to the wider society or the citizens. So as you see here, in the very beginning, in 2005, well, it took them 3 years after the first initiative in the parliament to actually use this in elections. So it takes time also to initiate the idea. It takes time to actually, let's say, find the best technical solution, find the best procedural solutions. And that might not even be the case for the first use, because after every use case, after every election, you need to refocus. You need to understand what went well, what needs to be improved, what kind of technical solution need to improve. So it's a process. It's a process all the time that you need to be aware and to move together with the context where internet voting actually lies. So and over the years, this process, the orange line, as you see here, it has grown, has then reached in the last 3 elections here more than 45%. It's kind of a plateau, kind of a place that is most likely the place to be. I think as a former election organizer, I'm not expecting to have really large numbers of internet voters. I'm expecting for the people to make the best solution for them, or make the best choice of what kind of voting method they want to use. And we see that approximately half of the voters still need paper voting, and that's totally okay. And approximately half are really taking advantage of this possibility of internet voting. But overall turnout, as you see here, we are more or less in this 50-60% scale here, where the national elections, the parliamentary elections are usually a bit more than 60%, and the rest somewhere in between there. Well, European Parliament elections even less, but that's a whole different story here. But it's really important to understand the overall, or the impact of internet voting on overall turnout is not a really strong one. It has a stabilizing effect. It stabilizes the decline of turnout. It doesn't bring a lot of new people to voting, because again, turnout is something that needs to be impacted differently, not through election technology, not through, let's say, the technicalities of election organization, but through better policies. There need to be a lot of different reasons for the voter to actually come out, not only internet voting here. So unfortunately, we can't say that there's a really immediate and strong effects there. How it's actually working out for us, let's say practically. So during the voting period of 6 days, last time, you have the possibility to download a separate application. So it is not a, let's say, browser-based solution, but it's a separate application which has to be downloaded, which again offers the election organizer more flexibility to be sure of the security measures, because with browser-based solutions we have to also accept the, let's say, potential weaknesses of the browser. So you download the standalone application. You can do this in any computer system widely used, also Linux and also Macintosh, but of course Windows. And then choose what kind of identification method you want to use. So it was possible to use ID card or mobile ID last time, but in 2023, when we have our parliamentary election again, there will be a third one. It's going to be Smart ID, which is a computer-based mobile phone ID solution, really similar to mobile ID, but technically a bit different. So, but this third possibility will also be here added to the mix in the next elections. You use your PIN1 or your authentication certificate. It's a PKI-based solution, and then you get to the choices. In Estonia, we are a list-based democracy, let's say, or proportional-based democracy. So no single member districts, no plurality or majoritarian systems, only proportional list systems. So you have a list of candidates and you make a choice from this list. You choose one candidate from this example list here. You confirm it by signing. That means you use a different certificate you use also for your everyday signing. We sign all kinds of documents also in our everyday life, and then you have concluded your voting process, and you can start this process as many times as you want. Again, this is again something maybe have to explain to you in a bit, but it is possible to do this as many times as you want, and your last vote then counts. And this QR code here that you see on the screen is part of the individual verifiability, that with a separate smartphone application, it is possible to actually check that your vote actually reached the central server correctly, that your computer worked out fine. Because when we look at the weakest link in the whole chain of events, it's your computer, and this is then the possibility for the voter themselves to actually check that everything in the computer worked out fine and went correctly. So why is it possible to actually vote as many times as you want? That's because, as already was said before, there is inherently, let's say, natural problem embedded to remote voting, and that's the uncontrolled environment. And in this uncontrolled environment, we need to have a procedural solution to actually minimize the risks of coercion or some kind of threats or somebody saying how you should actually vote. And in the internet voting field, it is possible to vote as many times as you want electronically. So that means if somebody is threatening you or saying how you should vote, you actually go to another computer and vote again. And then your actual vote stays, that you actually wanted to, or whom you actually wanted to give your vote to. And if it's still not possible to actually do this online, you go to the polling station. As we saw, it is possible to go to any polling station during the week, also on the last day. So on election Sunday, when it's only possible to vote on paper, you can go to the polling station, and then your paper vote actually counts as your internet vote, and this is the final vote. When you vote on paper, you give one vote, and that's the final one, because you do this in a different setting. You do this in a different environment. So this is called the virtual voting booth. This is something that Estonia has used from the very beginning. It was actually heavily disputed or also in 2005 in the Supreme Court of Estonia. But the Supreme Court said really strongly in the judgment that it's a valid solution for this, let's say, in embedded problem of this let's say environmental problem that goes together with remote voting. So virtual voting booths through recasting the vote is a really important factor of actually guaranteeing this coercion-free voting. The second really important factor here to emphasize is how the double envelope scheme works, how we guarantee that the vote stays anonymous, that nobody actually knows how is it actually possible for the government, for somebody else to actually know how we voted. For that matter, we actually mimic also a paper voting logic. That is being used also quite heavily in the Estonian election. It's voting through envelopes, that it is possible to vote from everywhere in Estonia by envelopes, and these envelopes then end up in your home district for counting. And the same logic is here, that you give your vote, it's actually a text file, it's really a simple vote, and nothing has to do with your person yet. And then this vote is encrypted by the public key, the key pair, and the private key is held by a multitude of National Electoral Committee members. So it's the key is split into different parts, which is distributed between the High Committee members. Then they all come together later, and they are able to actually decrypt the encrypted votes before the counting. And around this encrypted vote, anonymous vote, we don't know who actually gave this vote, comes a layer of digital signature of, let's say, your identity. It's really, really similar to the envelope logic we also have traditionally. And then all those envelopes, let's say, are kept in the central server. And if you vote more than once, the previous envelopes are being discarded without ever opening them, without ever knowing what's inside. And when we start counting or tallying the votes, the data of the personality or the personal information of the voter is separated from the actual votes. And we have a huge bunch of encrypted iVotes, totally anonymous. And then the National Electoral Committee members come together, decrypt the vote, and we have aggregated anonymous results there. So that's how both procedurally and technically it is possible to actually guarantee anonymity and therefore secrecy and freedom of the voting procedure. So it's really important to understand that transparency is the trust building element of any election organization or any election procedure. And here it's really important how the Estonian system is doing that is through different verification possibilities, through the individual verification that we saw with the QR code, where it is possible to actually check what kind of vote is held there. Through public-private key cryptography, as we talked about the virtual double envelope scheme before, that there's a separate timestamping utility also used that the third party is making sure that all the votes that are being gathered are the same votes that actually were sent in by voters, that nothing was added, nothing was taken away, and nothing was changed. So this is really important, and then it's being audited also later. And that there's a data audit, that there's special data auditors employed that actually check whether let's say, the bulk of votes that were gathered in the central server are the same votes that were actually then counted or tallied in the end without ever opening or let's say, making sure who the voters were. And for that, a lot of different cryptographic solutions are used, also mixing and let's say they mix permutate the order, how the cryptograms are held and so on, just to make sure that at no point nobody can retrack the actual let's say data audit results to the actual votes. It is possible to actually be audited also by third parties. We have party observers also who actually perform this data audit. That they can be also present there and do this for themselves, again to build this trust element here. And there's also a special observation procedure every time that it is possible for people to come to observe all of those procedures that are being done behind the computer, and for them to actually understand that those procedures, they have a crash course before. So every time they are being invited to go through a special course before, so they understand what's happening during this procedure. And then they can be there, they can be present, and this again builds trust into the system. And of course, you can go to GitHub also today and see all the source code of the server-side solution is actually public and can be accessed there. So we have a bit time left, but just really quickly about the research results also from 16 years that we have seen. We already saw that that it's not a silver bullet, unfortunately, for the youngest voter group, because the youngest voter group is least likely to vote at all. They are not coming out because of different reasons, not because they find voting cumbersome, but they do not come out because they don't feel the need to vote. That's something that the politicians and not the election organizers have to actually solve. What we actually see from research is that older voters actually vote faster than younger ones. And they do this because they actually know who to vote for. And that's why we see in the log files that we have anonymous log files who voted when, but then researchers have seen that actually that there's a tendency that older voters actually votes faster. And it's really, really important that lots of those people who actually need assistive technologies, people with visible disabilities, for example, or people who have it difficult to go to the polling station, really benefit from internet voting. They really actively use this possibility, and they can do this alone. They don't need anybody to help them. That's really, really important for them, actually. What we talked about before about turnout, that the researchers have found about a stickiness factor, that iVoters tend to vote also in the next elections, that they tend to actually stay voting. So that's really, really important. It doesn't bring a steep curve up, but it tends to keep people voting, but it brings a dramatic increase in abroad voting. And this is something that really I think also would help in your case, as I saw that there was a proof of concept about specifically abroad voting, and the idea is to actually maybe try this out for those people. That's something really, really important here. Yeah, according to the data, it takes around 3 minutes to vote, but when you go to the polling station, it depends how far you live and so on. So when it's more than half an hour, then the likeliness of incident actually skyrockets. Just to cap up why actually Estonia has been, let's say, successful. I wouldn't say other countries were not successful, but they had all the kinds of different reasons why to stop there, and let's hope that many of those actually still come around and start doing this again, namely Switzerland, for example, and Norway, for example, that had really promising pilots in the beginning of 2011 and 2013. First of all, EID, that there is a strong EID that it's possible to say who the person is behind the computer. That's the main building block of any e-solution, specifically internet voting. So I think that's really something that has to be put in lots of emphasis, that there's a trustworthy, really strong, unbreakable, let's say, it's impossible to actually falsify or something, EID solution first, and then we can think of a solution of voting electronically. There has to be a political will. It's really important to understand that in Estonia, there's not only hooray. There's always some political, let's say, forces, some political parties or movements that find internet voting somehow threatening, somehow negatively implying, but there has always been a majority behind the idea that we comply with the general principles of paper voting, that there's nothing turned upside down in internet voting. Also really important here. The size of the country is really important, and the size of where it's used. And in your case, I would really recommend to start somewhere low, start somewhere on a prefecture level or municipality level, or somewhere really where it can be tried out, it can gain trust there, and it can be built up from that. And as you talked about already, weather before, it's really very important to understand that we have our elections also in really cold and nasty times in March and in October, where we already might have snow. And so that's also what the researchers have said. Most likely, this is also something that has an impact, that people look out of the window and see, well, maybe we should do this online, not go to the polling station not so easily. And really quickly, a couple of words about where to go from here. As I already talked about, the constant need of upgrading, constant need of being on top of the potential risks in the online world. But still, there has to be some avenues where to actually work to. First of all, mobile devices. It's only possible on computers at this point, and there's a really strong movement currently that it should also be possible on mobile devices. So there's let's say a strong study being conducted currently, how it would be possible, how to actually minimize the risks that have already been, let's say, mitigated in the computers, let's say, environment, but it's a bit different in the mobile phones, because mobile phones, there's lots of different operation systems, there's lots of different new risks coming up that were not present in the computer. So we'll see. Most likely it will not be something for the next elections, but maybe something right after that. Alternative EID, as already talked, Smart ID most likely will be added in the next elections already. There's a strong discussion about additional verification methods to offer a feedback channel that when you have voted, you get also some kind of a third channel feedback, for example, through your personal site on the governmental portal that you have voted. You have some kind of tick behind the name just to be sure that all the risks are maintained, or even add facial recognition to this. There was a study that still says that facial recognition is still a bit raw to be used, but in the future, most likely this could be a case. And also internet voting as a service, that it would be possible for any company, any shareholder meeting, any university to actually utilize this trustworthy and easy way of conducting a survey or conducting a vote or whatever. So this most likely also in the next years will be a possibility that the government is offering a possibility of having internet voting as a service. So sorry for going a bit longer for a couple of minutes, but thank you very much for your attention, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion now. Thank you.
Thank you, Priit, for a very detailed explanation. And I feel like I foresee the future of Japan introducing iVoting. That's interesting. And let's have an open discussion right now. And for viewers, it's time for you to ask questions to Dr. Vinkel and to Kudo-san. And please feel free to ask questions, put the comments in the chat box. All right, so my first question to Priit. So, it's a bit surprising that it's quite neutral. It doesn't really affect the political landscape in many ways. So except for efficiency and the support for handicapped people to vote, it doesn't really affect the political outcome. Was it something you already know before introducing this, or this is something you learned after experiencing iVoting?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We did not know this before, and in 2002 and 2005, when there were two really like pivotal votings in the parliament, also to actually decide to have internet voting. This was one of the main issues also in the parliament, that whether this would have some adverse influence on maybe a bit more rural parties, more parties that maybe have more electorate in the older people segment. So that was really heavily talked about there, but there was a majority back then. And then we learned over the course of time, over the use of internet voting, that this, let's say, effect might have been there in the beginning, that only a bit younger, a bit more male, a bit more high educated, a bit more urbanized people voted in the beginning. As you saw, we had only 2% in the beginning, then 5% and so on. So in the beginning, it's a cross-section who actually vote there, and there it might have some implications. But after 3 elections, it all evened out or dispersed in the electorate, and we can't anymore say who the internet voter is. So together with that process, also, if there were any influences, those influences are also gone. We can say that mostly, or even most of the internet voters come from previous paper voters. So it doesn't generate new electorate that the politicians fear, that it brings somebody to voting who they haven't got before. But at least in the Estonian case, it was not the case. It took those people who already voted, brought those people to vote, and kept them voting. So I think that's the most important factor here.
It's a little bit surprising to me, and even counterintuitive. because I would assume that the younger generation people are more familiar with the internet and smartphone and everything. So their life is in the iPhone right now, smartphone, right? So given that the voting turnover of the Japanese younger generation has been decreasing year by year, and they tend to be apathetical on political issues. So I was thinking that introduction of the iVoting is a way of regaining the popularity of the younger generation on the political matters. So, but given the Estonian experiences, it might not be the best answer to regain the younger generation's focus on politics. How about, I don't know, maybe different in different countries? I don't know.
Exactly. What I wanted to say, that maybe this has a different effect in Japan because of your let's say experience in democracy, your experience in elections. It might have a different effect, because what we saw from surveys and from research is that yes, younger people are really do well in Facebook. They do really well in all these different gaming solutions, whatever. But they do not still do their own banking. They still do not do their own taxes. They do not communicate with the state until they are 24, 25, when they finish the college, for example, or university. They start living on their own. And at that point, at this 24, 25, the internet voting use skyrockets. So that's where it is really important to understand that although the younger generation, we have 16-year-olds, it's possible to vote in local elections, from 16 to 24, those people, yes, they are really active in the online world, but in a different field. They do not, or they don't have the interest in politics or interest in the societal matters so much yet. So that's why I also try to convene that it's important for the politicians to actually bring some policy issues that actually matter to them, that bring them to actually those questions. And then internet voting would actually work fine, because they already have this interest. But just with internet voting, why should they actually take part in elections? That's something that we have discussed heavily.
I see. It's a very good point. So one of the early success of the Estonian digital government was the tax filing, right? So it's just eliminated paperwork. So just the burden is out, right? But when it comes to election, it's not just the burden of voting itself, but you really have to be interested in politics.
Okay.
It's quite different from just eliminating the paperwork itself, right?
You are completely right that with tax declarations, not only it has taken away this let's say the factor of paper, but it has also taken away the factor of filing, because with the once only principle and with the solutions that we have, that all of your income, all of your already let's say previous all kinds of things you have done over the year are already known to the tax board and are already there. So you just have to sign. You don't have to find some kind of proof for somebody, because everything is happening in the banks. Everything is happening online. Your let's say pay slips, everything are going through the electronic channels, and there's enough data there. So that's where it has revolutionized the tax declarations, because you don't have to declare it yourself, because you have lots of declarations. So the system knows about this already. And of course, the paper factor, you don't have to go to some kind of office to actually sign this or do anything like that. So, but yeah, you are right that elections are a bit different. Let's say a bit different process. It needs a different understanding here. But still, I think Japan is a bit different society than Estonia. And who knows? Maybe there's a different effect.
Possible, right. But take it a little bit further. When it comes to tax filing, probably no one wants to see taxman knocking door, asking the resident to pay tax. So, being isolated from the taxman, physical visitation, is getting more kind of freedom. When it comes to election, you want to have some kind of a sense of gathering, sense of, community, sense of involvement, sense of being part of the contribution to the community. I don't know. So, maybe kind of festivity sense, feeling. I think that's very important, right? So maybe, those two are very different.
Exactly. I totally agree that elections need or build communities. And that's why actually half of the electorate still need paper voting. We are really understand those people who actually want to do that. And actually there was a study among first-time voters. And these 16, 17-year-olds who voted for the first time in local elections, and more than 80%, 4 out of 5, actually went to the polling station. And then the 20% did this electronically because they wanted to have this elevation. They are now, let's say, old enough to do something like that in the polling station, like their parents have done. But doing this on the computer, yes, it's easier, it's more convenient, but it doesn't convey this importance. So, but a lot of those people who previously went to the polling station, now these young people, tend to vote also electronically because they know what elections are. But for the first time, they need let's see, the community. So you're completely right that maybe we have to understand those people and then offer it for those people who need it, especially those who are traveling a lot or abroad and so on. So that's really, really beneficial to those.
Yeah. At the beginning of this open discussion session, I said I feel like I'm foreseeing the future of Japan being digitalized, right? And looking at the Estonian experiences, you started with the tax filing, and then the iPark, and then the online medicine, the healthcare record, and the police and the fire station. So starting from kind of a procedural stuff, right? That which doesn't really mean to anything. Just just a matter of killing time to meaningful stuff, right? So you eliminated inefficiency out of the life through the digitalization. So stepping from big one like tax filing, something else, then moving on to finally the iVoting, right? So maybe Japan is catching up with the same process, same trajectory, right? So eliminate unnecessary stuff. So use your time for more meaningful stuff, like meeting with your family or friends, enjoy your life, don't commute. It's just killing your time, etc., etc. But when it comes to important decision making like voting, which is also social, something like social, not a procedural, there is a certain limit in the degree of this digitalization. You still have to maintain in-person, person-to-person type of communication as an essential foundation of the community and society. Am I correct to say that?
Absolutely, you're correct that we should not look at internet voting as a completely, let's say the same service as any other. It has different implications, and really, really important here that the electorate or the society has accepted the way of doing things online. And in that matter, a lot hinges on e-identity. And not only e-identity as an authentication matters, but also e-identity in signature matters. That people are able to actually sign, to confirm, to let's say remotely say that they agree on a lot of things much easier, and this has changed the let's say how we think of services, and that maybe needs to precede any like this this possibility. But again, we should never make internet voting compulsory or let's say not have paper voting in parallel. So there's always somebody who wants to vote on paper. And that's what we have to understand.
I see. Thank you. Do you think the same line of logic should apply to other political processes currently being half digitalized, like policy consultations or participatory budgeting, any political activities, so to speak, are now somewhat moving towards digitalization, right?
Yeah. This is a process that takes time. Right? It doesn't happen overnight, but yeah, this participatory factor of any, let's say, engagement or digital engagement is really, really important and has to be acknowledged in parallel to all what the government offers in field of services. As already talked about, there's quite a lot of local municipalities in Estonia that offer this participatory budgeting. That's 1% of the local budget is being decided by the budgeting process. And where, again, it is possible to vote electronically and also go to the town hall, for example, and give a paper, let's say, their vote, who should get this or not. E-petitions, for example, that's really something that benefits from this digitalization, let's say. It's much easier to get signatures. To be viable to actually present some kind of petition to the parliament, for example, which really just last, I think it was in the beginning of this year that there was a petition about abolishing these fur farms, these animal farms in Estonia. And this went to the parliament, and the parliament actually accepted it because of this strong, a really large petition that came from there. So it really brings a new level, let's say, of engagement when you have such possibilities, e-signatures, for example, to actually offer a possibility to participate in processes. Indeed.
So overall, people can be, I would say many people are dreaming about the digital democracy, so to speak, right? So maybe that's one of the way to engage people more to political arena. But, digitalization provide options, but not replacement. Exactly. So combination of the two, discretion to choose from the two still remains as an important right for the people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's really important to understand, that you should never force digitalization. That's something that happens with time and with the added benefit that you get. For example, banks in Estonia, they for a long time used these quite not so secure these password cards, so you have to scratch one password and another. But in the middle of 2000s, they set a limit of transactions when you're not using secure, let's say, identification like ID cards for your banking. And that skyrocketed the use of EID because people saw the benefit from this with a little bit help from the private sector, that they actually saw that they also get the benefit from using EID, that they also get the higher rates of confidence that the person behind the computer is actually that person, not somebody who has stolen the password card from the person, for example. So that's something that is also really important, just to, in the cooperation with private sector, the government has to also offer possibilities for these e-services to flourish, not only governmental services. That's also really important.
Right. Yeah. In this series of webinars, we once talked about the Decidim, which is electronic participation to politics invented in city of Barcelona. And now it's being used in many other cities like Helsinki and so forth. And our experience in Japan is that it is useful and interesting experience to have, electronic, opinionating the participation, but it alone doesn't really provide a sense of perfection. Still, we need physical opportunities to discuss and communicate. And that experience actually resonates with the Estonian experiences in iVoting, I guess, right? And let's move on to the questions from the audience, and then some words from Kudo-san, maybe, and then to conclude. Right, one question is from Kimura-san. Has iVoting changed their election campaign, e.g. for abroad voters? Any suggestion is highly appreciated.
Yes, to be honest, internet voting has heavily changed the Estonian election campaign as such, because we don't have only one day of voting. Already, the campaign was a really long one because you had to get to a lot of people over a longer time period, let's say before the last local elections, we already had a majority of voters turn out already before election day. So election day is not the most popular day, but already during advance voting, most of the people actually came out. So that's why the parliament 3 years ago thought that why actually restrict any kind of campaigning or any kind of time or place of campaigning. And beginning of this year, there's no, let's say, restrictions on any campaigning events, on any campaigning time or any campaigning place. Usually, before it was that on election day you can't campaign anymore because you have to have silence, let's say. But it was possible during advance voting. Before it was that you can't have these large billboards outside 40 days before election day, but you can have it before, just to have, let's say, equality for the parties. But now it is possible to actually have campaign anywhere, and the main, let's say, energy of the parties goes to the internet, because this is a much cheaper and easier way to actually reach people. And as you can't have any restrictions in the internet anyway, it makes more sense to actually also do not have any restrictions outside on the street. So currently it's only forbidden to have any kind of campaigning inside the polling station, but that's it. Anywhere else you can have as much campaigning as you want. And that kind of worked last month. So that people got the information, people or the parties didn't overstep any, let's say, restrictions or boundaries that there might have been. And the question was about abroad voters. The most effective, or actually the only way of actually getting to those people is the internet, because you can't get any papers to them, you don't catch them. Maybe in Helsinki, where lots of Estonians work, yeah, you might get them also on the street, but somewhere over the world you can't get to them. That's why also the campaigning has changed over the years and really, really heavily moved to the internet and try to catch those people where they actually go and get the information in the internet. So banners, special sites, all kinds of mailing lists, different solutions they use in this, let's say, online environment. So yes, it has had a strong impact on how actually campaign is made.
Okay, thank you very much. The last question from Oksan. This is a bit, country-specific question. So, please answer as appropriate. So, do you think the system of election in your country, in Estonia, would be able to withhold its integrity against such a massive, crude, harsh, and undemocratic attacks as Mr. Trump exercised in the United States? Do you think that your legislative and judicial branches are ready to defend it together?
So I'm not a state official anymore, so I can be much more open to answer here. So unfortunately, I have to say that over the last, let's say, 4 or 5 years, the way of thinking has spread not only in the United States, but also elsewhere. Also in Estonia, the way of thinking that the election organizer is the enemy, that the election organizer somehow is to fault that you lost, like we saw in the United States, that somebody, I don't know, falsified the votes, or that there was some kind of problems with the machines there. And unfortunately, this has also been one of the modus operandi of some political forces in Estonia. That means that after every election we have had, also in 2019, also in 2017 already, there have been a lot of complaints in the Supreme Court, because it's possible to go to the Supreme Court on online voting matters. And there's tens of decisions by the Supreme Court on internet voting. And so far, I have to say so far, all of these attacks have been unsuccessful, or have not yielded something like nullifying or cancelling the votes or something like that. But there have been tries after every election, also after the local elections. I think even last week they had the last complaint in the Supreme Court. So it's something that we have to accept as a new normality, unfortunately, as election organizers. That this is one, let's say, tool in the toolbox of a bit, let's say, those parties who want to gain from actually being anti-government in some matters, or let's say sow some doubt in the results, unfortunately. But yeah, you have to be ready for that. The State Election Office has legal advisors, or let's say jurists, really ready to answer those accusations. That there's a technical team ready to actually answer all of those potential. Let's say they may maybe look at some risk, that this risk maybe didn't, let's say, was fulfilled, but still the risk is so large that we should abolish internet voting at all. A really normal or everyday, let's say, complaint that Estonia gets after the election. But all of these, let's say, hypothetical risks have not been successful in the courts. And fortunately, so far, elections have gone well. But as I already said before, if something like this would happen during, it's possible to complain also during the elections, and it really has merit and really has some problem tied to it. Then internet voting could be stopped. Internet voting could be cancelled also during the process. And people could be asked to come out on election day and vote traditionally. So this is like a fallback in that matter. And so far, as for the second question, yes, especially the judicial branch has to be ready, because they get the most, let's say, burden of these complaints. But also the legislative branch constantly is discussing about new features, new additions to the law that would actually make it even more secure, more trustworthy, build up new, let's say, feature. As we talked about, this facial recognition possibility was heavily discussed in the parliament. The feedback loop possibility was also discussed there. So that's a constant process that we have to be there. And unfortunately, we don't have to be in the US to actually face kind of similar accusations also there, because it's technical, let's say, some kind of a technical solution is involved. And that's already enough for sowing some kind of doubt in general public, unfortunately.
All right. Yeah, and that recalls my conversation with my colleague at the Caltech. I myself is a visiting professor at the Caltech. And my colleague professor at the Caltech gave me a kind of interesting question. So digitalization, poses very important philosophical question. Do you want to choose efficiency or transparency? Right? So if you vote into the machine, after that it's invisible. It's a black box, but it's very efficient. Do you prefer to have efficiency or do you want to have a transparency?
Exactly.
Right? So it's more of the fundamental value choices rather than, technology issues, right? So which kind of society do you want to choose is a more fundamental democratic question to ask rather than the digitalization itself. So, this is very, how do you say, not a white or black kind of a question. It's a value choices. So it's a very tough question, right? But, that's the kind of a world we are living in right now. So unless you decide which way to go, this kind of question goes on and on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
I agree.
So as a matter of time, let's ask Kudo-san to make one comment and conclude.
Yes. Thank you, Priit, and thank you, Tak. And my last comment is that, in the beginning of my presentation, I showed you a photograph, two men holding ballot box and with paper tickets. But I think after this discussion today, the hybrid approach of using iVoting as well as, paper voting could be the good solution to Japan in the future. As the going to the polling station may be a social event, so we should not lose that. That's what I thought. But thank you very much for the discussion today.
Okay, so Kudo-san, final announcement.
Yes, let me change my status. So thank you very much. This is Kudo from Smart City Institute Japan, and thank you for viewing today. And also, thank you very much for today's discussion. And Priit, I hope to see you again soon. So I will go to the slide. So thank you for viewing today. And after this event, you will see the questionnaire. And we would appreciate if you cooperate with the questionnaire after this event. And also the programs of this webinars, including today, will be available on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. As also the videos, including the past, will be viewed, can be posted on the Smart City Institute YouTube channel. And today is the end of Estonia week, and thank you very much for viewing, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And next week, we have two webinars coming up. Wednesday, this is the 5th monthly pitch called the 7 Minutes, and the startup companies, 4 companies will appear. And also on Thursday, Smart Rural is the agenda, so please stay tuned. And about Smart City Institute Japan, the members are growing, and we have now 3 years of history now. And also our global partner organization, of course, the EU Governance Academy, eGA, is included. So again, thank you for viewing today, and I hope to see you next week as well. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.